Emily, talking about the blue zones.
Thank you, Jean Marie. I hope I don't disappoint after that nice introduction. I appreciate and thank you all for having me today. Um, so BayCare presents, let's see, there we go. Um, Today's topic, as most of you know, is going to be blue zones and lessons on longevity. So we think about longevity and how long we're going to be living. When I think about this topic, I actually think back to one of my great girlfriends. Um, when I was 12 years old, I remember loving to visit with my girlfriend Viviana. Vivi's great grandmother, Margarita, lived at her house, and boy, could that woman tell a good story. It wasn't all in English, but she would act it out, move around, change her voice and inflection. And for a moment, I would forget that I couldn't speak Spanish. She captivated everyone. Margarita lived to be 98 years old, and up into her last days, she remained as sharp as a tack. She was a genuinely joyful person. There was something about her that made me awestruck, her vibrance, despite her age, and to think of all the things that she had experienced and observed throughout her lifetime. Her vivid memories and her ability to share them was truly incredible, even in her older years. She could tell us about the little things about her village, the place where she was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and how she grew up in the 1920s there. She could describe the colors and the layout of her small house and the types of vegetables she tended in their family garden. She maintained a garden in Longwood, Florida, where we grew up until her last months. She could tell us about her friends that she had had then and stories not only from her childhood, but over those 9 decades of a life well lived. She passed away about 5 years ago. I think about her often, especially in the work that I do as a dietitian. I think about what it means to be able to live that long, to accumulate that much knowledge, cultivate that many relationships, and to have enjoyed that kind of rich quality of life. I think about Margarita and I ask myself, how long do I want to live? How long do you want to live? Most people want to live as long as possible, but there are caveats to aging. People also worry about decline as they age. Will my function go down? Will I be able to care for myself, be independent? How will I get around? What do the years matter if there isn't quality? This is a picture of a 91-year-old, and something tells me that he's getting around just fine. Margarita lived with her niece in those last years, but she was still able to take good care of herself up until her final days. She cooked for herself, cleaned for herself, walked to the store daily, walked to her church to pray daily. She tended her garden daily and spent time with family and friends every day. And she passed away peacefully in her sleep. If you knew that you could live that kind of quality of life, like that 98-year-old and this 91-year-old, would you want to live as long as possible? Unfortunately, according to the CDC, health of US citizens as a whole continues to decline. And as our life expectancy is proportionally dropping, there's more than one contributing factor. Yes, COVID definitely played a large impact, but this trend was beginning before COVID. Delving deeper into the causes of mortality, meaning the causes of why people die, researchers have identified that merely 20%, let me emphasize that again, only approximately 20% of how long the average person lives is dictated by their genetics, and that the largest contributing factor, approximately 80% of our longevity, is determined by our quality and by our quality of life and our lifestyle choices. You've heard risk factors for decreased longevity: tobacco use, poor nutrition, lack of physical activity, excessive alcohol use. But when we look at these things as a whole, what we're really talking about is our progression and risk for chronic diseases. When we look at longevity in these individuals that live into their late 90s, into their 100-year-old markers, they really don't have these chronic diseases. In the US, even before COVID, chronic disease has been on the rise. Currently, three-fifths of all US adults aged 18 and older have a chronic disease, and two-fifths have two or more. Heart disease and stroke are the leading cause of death and account for about a third of all adult deaths in the United States. Cancer is the second leading cause of death, with more than 1.7 million people diagnosed with cancer each year. These statistics aren't very promising. They also speak to the declining quality of life in the United States as we age. But is that our fate? Can we as individuals do anything about that? So, my next question for you is, how can we live a long, healthy, high quality of life? How can we remain healthy over our lifetime? Meaning, how do we keep these chronic diseases at bay or help prevent from getting new ones? Is there a way to ensure quality, not just quantity of life? This question goes back over 500 years. And back then, one solution was find and drink from the mythical fountain of youth that keeps us young and healthy forever. Ponce de Leon went in search of such a mythical fountain of youth in the early 1500s, but he was never able to find this treasure. Today, scientific explorers aren't looking for a fountain, but they are looking towards new and different pharmaceuticals. Unfortunately, we have yet to discover a magic pill, a magic herb, or a magic food for health and longevity. And we're left asking, is there anything out there? Is there a magical recipe for health and longevity? And if there were, what would that recipe look like? A different explorer on a National Geographic expedition by the name of Dan Buettner teamed up with National Institute of Aging and set off on a quest in 2004 to find out that magical recipe for health and longevity. What Buettner, where Ponce left off, Buettner and his team of scientific anthropologists and demographers were able to identify 5 communities that span the globe. These communities are home to the greatest number of centenarians, people who live to be over 100. Not only did these 5 places have lower rates of chronic disease and longer life expectancies than anywhere else in the world, but people in these communities reported higher quality and satisfaction in life, even as they aged. Buettner collectively dubbed these 5 places blue zones, going from left to right: Loma Linda, California; Nicoya, Costa Rica; Sardinia in Italy; Icaria, Greece; and Okinawa, Japan. Geographically, they're pretty close to the equator, but that's not the only thing that these places had in common. If you were this is a resident from Nicoya, and in Nicoya, Costa Rica, to compare with health, they spend just about 15% as much as the United States does on their health care. But when you think about people in these areas, if a resident in Nicoya, Costa Rica reaches the age of 60, they are 4 times more likely to live to the age of 90 than an individual in the United States who reaches the age of 60. In Icaria, people experience about 20% less cancer and half the rate of heart disease and almost no dementia, when we in the United States struggle from these things. If you were a citizen of Okinawa, you would be almost 4 times as likely to reach the age of 100 as a citizen of the United States. These statistics are meaningful and show that people in these blue zones must be doing something right, that they have better longevity and better quality of life than we do. So that brings us to say blue zones are home to these people that have longer lives and higher quality of lives, but what makes them what makes them similar? What makes them special? They're definitely a diverse group of cultures. And his team, remember there were anthropologists there looking at the cultures and the demography of what was happening. And and his team hypothesized that these regions must share a lot of cultural similarities. But the more that they looked at the culture, the more that they realized that these communities were very different. Their diets were different. The way that they engaged with each other and the types of spirituality that they experienced were different. But they did have a lot of very same similarities. The history and the people of these locations were drastically different, but they uncovered commonalities that have proven certain aspects of your community and livelihoods can decrease your signs of aging. It's probably been a long time since everybody's seen a Venn diagram, but this is a Venn diagram. And what it looks at is these cultural aspects and how they overlap. In the center, where you see family, no smoking, a plant heavy diet, constant, moderate physical activity, social engagement, and another aspect of diet that they include legumes. And then on these outer circles, there were also similarities, but they didn't cross over all of the locations. So as you get to the outer sides of the circle, some of them say, yes, we eat a lot of nuts. Others say, yes, we eat a lot of turmeric or fava beans or have wine. But in the center, family, the things that we're actually avoiding in the social engagement that we keep seem to be the most impactful. Physical activity, we know, is directly associated with decreased risks of cancer. But look at what we're talking about here. It's not necessarily going to the gym, it's that constant movement and activity. Through the research that Buettner and his group did, they took this schematic and we put them into factors that are now called the power of 9. So if you too are looking at trying to decrease your risk for chronic disease, improve your quality of life, and improve your longevity, these are the things that we might be able to focus on. The power of 9 is divided into 9 different aspects and color coded because we can kind of group them into different areas. Move naturally, have a sense of purpose, downshift during the day, using the 80% rule when it comes to eating, having a plant-based diet, having wine, but only drinking in moderation, making sure that you are part of a collective community, putting loved ones first, and having a sense of belonging. Because we aren't able to go through all of these today, and because some of them actually overlap, I'm going to be taking 2 of these off so that we can kind of meet the needs for our conversation. Without further ado, let's delve into what we talk about when we're saying move naturally. We are not necessarily talking about weightlifting and going to the gym and doing these high intensity interval trainings. The power of 9 is talking about residents in the blue zone typically do a lot of encouraged natural movement throughout the day. It's part of their daily lifestyle. They spend time gardening, growing their own food. Residents in the blue zone live in a way that causes them to be active naturally throughout the day without physical strain. Constantly working at activities such as that cleaning and gardening or home maintenance allow people to remain functionally fit. We say use it or lose it. So we're talking about functional fitness, not strain. As we look at different areas, so Sardinia, Italy, for example, people in Sardinia walk 5 or more mountainous miles per day, even into their 90s. Have you ever heard of that 10,000 steps a day? Where does that 10,000 steps come from? Well, 10,000 steps is actually equivalent to 5 miles. And you can thank the Blue Zone for that. This research has kind of showed us about functional movement. We know that if we walk at least 8,500 steps a day, we can decrease our risk for type 2 diabetes. Wow, just by walking and moving throughout my day. So don't just think about the time in the gym, but think about the time that your feet are hitting that pavement. Can you add more steps throughout the day, starting from noon till night? That's what they do in these blue zones, and it's greatly associated with longevity. Next, we move into that part of the circle about purpose. And I like these two examples. In two of our blue zone regions, there are actually words that mean purpose. Ikaiga and plan de vida. Both of these translate to why I wake up in the morning. Having a reason to wake up in the morning, we know that we have a sense of purpose. It's consistent in its commonality between these different cultures and all of the blue zones. People know their purpose, and their purpose is an overall reaching aspect. They have a purpose to be with their loved ones and their family members. Whatever the reason is, whether it's religion, family, or a goal that you're chasing, sorry, it's important to not let it guide your life or to let it guide your life and to keep you motivated. One project for the Blue Zones interviewed 163 centenarians, and out of all of them, only 5 of them did not know that belong or did not belong to a faith-based community. So faith, it doesn't have to look like organized religion, but faith is a very big part of that sense of greater purpose and belonging. It may be worth considering that this could be largely about having a sense of purpose rather than a sense of religion itself. While religion helps people have a reason to get up in the morning as they age, maintaining a sense of purpose should also yield some of the same benefits. So, finding your purpose and finding your community is very important. And in these regions, in these areas, I think back to Margarita. She walked to church every day, sometimes twice a day, and had a community of spiritual and faithful believers around her. Faith looks very different than it probably did from Margarita, who grew up in San Juan, but we can still find that in different activities that we do throughout the day. The next thing that they looked at in that power of 9 is downshifting. What we mean by downshifting is stress management. Stress is associated with every major age-related disease. And I know it's easy to talk about stress and say, hey, decrease your stress. But how do we do that? How can we? We know that stress increases inflammation and lowers quality of life. So trying to keep stress low, especially as we age, is crucial for that longevity. What can we do about downgrading our stress? To downshift, some of the things that we can do, and residents in blue zones give us great examples of this, is that they've built stress relief activities into their day. So, what are some of those things that these residents do? Okinawans from Maui or have a social group center that exists in their life and social supports. When times get rough, they go to these social centers to laugh, enjoy, engage. Where's your social center? Do you have one? Do you have after work activities? Are there things that you can go, places where you can go maybe on your way home Or maybe even while you're at work, is there a place that you can go to be and have social support? Another example of this is in Linda, California. Or Loma Linda. What's different about Loma Linda? Well, it's actually a Seventh-day Adventist community. They have these same type of faith circles in their communities that are open doors whenever somebody needs it. They can walk over and engage with people that they know and have community. Residents of Yakara will all take a nap in the afternoon. I know that we probably can't do that, but that nap has been found to correlate with lower risk of heart disease because it decreases total levels of stress. So, what can we do to downshift? There are apps that are available for meditation. I know that our community health groups have different apps that have been made available. Can you use those apps? What have you done? What do you do? What do your friends do? What do other family members do? Talk to people, engage, make a plan. Try to set aside time to downshift, not just on the weekends, but every day. What about food? I'm a dietitian and I could talk about food all day long. But when we look at these blue zones, their diets are all very different. Some have wine, some don't drink at all. Some end up having a little bit of fish. Others don't have access to fish very much. People in the blue zones typically do not gain unwanted weight. They have a rounded diet, but their biggest thing, and in fact, Okinawa, they have a word, and I'm not going to say it. It's a phrase. I'm not going to say it right. Harahichibu, which means only eat till 80% full. 8 parts full, not 10. Feeling mindful about eating, and that's another thing that we've talked about in community health is mindfulness. Mindfulness about where you are in your level of hunger. Don't skip meals. People in these blue zones eat 3 times a day. They eat till 80% full. They can get up and move and walk those mountainous miles after a meal. They don't have to sit back and take a nap. Eating till 80% full is one of those steps to make your body strong and improve that healthier life. Another thing we look at is, I'm sorry, I think I skipped ahead. I have 3 screens open. Consistently eating until full has been associated with increases in metabolic risk factors, including weight gain, hypertension, hyperglycemia, and fatty liver disease. One Japanese study found that consistently eating until full is associated with these risk factors, and they included that when you only eat to 80%, your body can actually start healing. What about the types of foods that we're eating? They call it the plant slant in the blue zones. What does that mean? It means focusing on plants in the diet. Meat is rarely eaten in most of the blue zones, usually only a few times of the month. And people still get their protein and are still doing fine in their ability to maintain muscle. The plant slant diets are heavily associated with decreased risk of cardiovascular disease. And numerous studies have shown that plant-based diets can decrease risk for heart disease, hypertension, high cholesterol, and stroke. All of these factors can be attributed to improved longevity and decreased risk of chronic diseases. So what are we talking about when it comes to the plant slant? When we're talking about adding proteins in, not just from animal-based sources, don't forget about your pulses. In fact, the United States, our general healthful diet includes excess amounts of plant-based protein from pulses. These are beans, peas, lentils, chickpeas. Having these pulses, at least half a cup, at least 3 times a week, decreases your risks of all types of cardiovascular disease. Black beans, especially, have a cholesterol lowering effect. So if you aren't eating beans and you like them, please start to reincorporate them into your diet. At least half a cup, at least 3 times weekly. But just because you're eating the beans doesn't mean that we need to eat to 100% full. Eat till satisfied. Be mindful of where you are and how much you're eating. One of the things, and this is probably the slide that people like the most, wine at 5. Drinking wine in moderation can be beneficial. But when people are talking about drinking wine, it's a small glass, not a standard size large glass. Look at these gentlemen toasting in this very small 2 to 3 ounce glass of wine, maybe once or twice a day. The wine is actually consumed as part of your community group, not individually. So collectively, it is part of a meal as well, not individually. Making sure that we're making smart choices about alcohol use and not excessive. The CDC guidelines for alcohol use follow pretty closely what is talking about in the blue zones. Women are recommended to not consume more than one alcoholic drink daily, and men are recommended to not consume more than two. Be mindful of what the size of your alcoholic beverage is, and if you're able to drink wine and switch from other sources, great. But at the end of the day, it's not just wine that's having effect. What is in the wine and why is wine the interesting of interest to us? Well, it's resveratrol that's found in the grapes and the berries. So if you currently don't drink alcohol, the recommendation is not to start including it. But maybe look at trying to include these dark purple berries, things like blueberries, raspberries, grapes, pomegranates. Resveratrol has actually been known to inhibit tumor growth, be anti-inflammatory, be a vasodilator so it relaxes your blood vessels to decrease blood pressure, and have a neuroprotective or a brain protective effect. That explains things very simply. So if I'm eating these dark purple colors, I can get the same effects that that wine might have, especially if I'm not doing that consumption in a social group as part of a healthful plant-based meal. Let me try to include those blueberries and grapes or pomegranates and raspberries. Can I switch those types of fruits in for some of the other fruits I might be consuming more often? If you aren't drinking, don't start, but you can start to include these healthful fruits that have that resveratrol. Moving on to our seventh power, putting loved ones first. Successful centenarians always keep their friends and family close. Think about Margarita. You heard me get a little choked up when I talk about her. She was not my great grandmother. She was Vivi's great grandmother, but I considered her an aunt. Typically, in these communities, in these blue zone communities, grandparents and parents live at the same homes as their children and grandchildren. Blue zones, families are very tight knit. They're walking distance. You know everyone in your community. Putting loved one first and having that sense of community is so important. When was the last time you picked up the phone and called a loved one? Do you do it every day? Can you make it a habit? Can it be part of your community and your de-stress time to talk and laugh with someone? When we keep our loved ones first and close, people tend to have a better quality of life. They report better satisfaction. If you're able to live near communities, not only does it impact the longevity of the grandparents, but it decreases mortality rate of the grandchildren starting from a low age. Keeping those communities around us and being part of it, there's a protective effect, a decreased stress effect of having all of those people around. Put the loved ones first. If they can't be there physically, we know that we can still make phone calls, do Zoom meetings, do FaceTimes. We learned from COVID that having those face to face encounters actually improved our joy and our receptivity and our balance from those communications. We engaged. When you're in work meetings, turn on your camera. Let people know what you look like. Smile back. If your loved ones, they don't have to be family, they can be your neighbors. Do you know your neighbors? Go meet them. Do something nice for them. Don't expect anything in return, but start building and putting loved ones first and creating that community. It's been found that individuals who are deprived of community have a shorter lifespan. A European study carried out across 5 countries, including Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, and England, found that community may be essential for survival at older years. Think about that. Although Margarita was able to do her own activities, do you think that she would have been as engaged and joyful about them if she wasn't also living with her niece? These studies found that survival rate of individuals aged 75 to 84 was reached, and in those who reached 85 to 95 was much higher in the people who were not deprived of community. So again, put those loved ones first. If you haven't found a way to find a sense of community, put one together for yourself. Okinawa social groups, we talked about those older. These ladies here are 95 or years older, and they've had the same friends. These 3 women have been friends since the age of 5. Is there somebody in your Facebook that you went to elementary or primary school with that you can reach out to re-engage, to connect, to remember what it was like when you were children growing up? In Okinawa, women and men have their social groups and they get together daily. Find your loved ones, put them first. So we bring it back all together. Remember, we had the power of 9, but we looked at mostly 7 points of these. And I touched a lot on the religion and faith together. So the 4 key points of these things for longevity were: move naturally, have a purpose, eat right, that 80% rule, fill to 80%, the plant slant, keep plants forward in the diet, and be with loved ones. Can we, in the end, maybe make Florida, if we work hard enough, the next blue zone? We are geographically desirable. We live in those coastal areas. We have the ability to make our own gardens, create walking areas and communities around us. Can you get those steps? When was the last time you went for a walk on one of our beaches? I challenge you to find those things that might work well for you. And with that, I end the presentation.
Emily, that was fabulous. And I think you all can see now why I spoke so highly of her in the beginning. And again, being an exercise physiologist and clinical health coach, she just speaks to my soul about the things we need to do, because it's not a huge life change that you have to make the second. It's more of taking those moments and just starting adding those moments. And when you start adding one and then the second one and the third one, it starts to become part of your life and it starts to be doable. And I think you really showed that beautifully. I am going to stop the recording, so give me a second there, and then we'll go look to see of our questions.